As the summer of 2025 fades into autumn, the Russian military's much-vaunted summer offensive has collapsed into a quagmire of failure marked by staggering losses, tactical ineptitude, and a deepening crisis of morale and logistics. I'm former Navy SEAL Chuck Pfarrer, and today we're going to dive into the numbers of Putin's summer offensive. So join me as we report live from Ukraine at the Kyiv Post's point of impact. Launched with bombastic rhetoric from the Kremlin, Putin's third summer offensive aimed to break Ukraine's resistance and deliver a decisive blow to secure Russian control over key regions. Instead, it's exposed the frailties of Russia's creaking war machine, achieving negligible territorial gains at an exorbitant cost in blood and materiel. From Kherson to Kursk, Russian forces have stumbled, bled, and in some cases retreated, unable to overcome a resilient Ukrainian defense that has masterfully exploited Russia's predictable and poorly executed attacks. 3 years after the catastrophic Russian defeat at Hostomel, arguably the most critical battle of the war, Putin's summer blitz has left Russia no closer to victory in Ukraine. And it's increasingly clear that such a victory may forever elude him. The Russian summer offensive, which began in earnest in May 2025, targeted multiple fronts across Ukraine, including Kherson, Kyiv, Pokrovsk, Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, Kremenna, Kupiansk, Sumy, and Kursk. In each sector, Russian forces have encountered fierce resistance, achieving only marginal gains while suffering staggering losses. Russian efforts in Kherson Oblast focused on consolidating control over occupied territories and pushing Ukrainian forces back across the Dnipro River. Despite redeploying elements of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, a full VDV parachute division, and other units, Russian advances stalled. Ukrainian forces have steadfastly maintained positions on the south bank, repelling Russian assaults and inflicting heavy losses. No significant territorial gains were reported, and Russian operations were hampered by Ukrainian drone strikes targeting supply lines. The Ukrainian Air Force also shined, launching strikes with their French AASM Hammer guided bombs, used to great effect against Russian troop concentrations, command nodes, and most importantly, Russian drone control points. Ukrainian partisans and deeply inserted special operations forces have turned the areas around Melitopol and Tokmak into bandit country. Partisans are playing on Russian supply trains and logistics. They have also targeted Russian sentries and collaborators within the occupational security forces. These activities not only inflect Russian logistics, but divert significant Russian troop strength from the zero line. In Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Russian assaults near Kyiv aim to breach Ukrainian defenses and advance towards the regional capital. But predictable Russian small-scale attacks, usually involving platoon-sized units and conducted in broad daylight, were repelled with heavy casualties. In this area of operations, Ukraine mastered the tactic of allowing Russian units to penetrate as far as 3 to 5 kilometers before they attacked. Ukrainian artillery, drones, and infantry then smashed the lead Russian elements and annihilated the survivors as they attempted to regain Russian lines. The Russian 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, previously mauled at Vuhledar, has failed to make headway against fortified Ukrainian positions. with no notable territorial progress. In the strategic city of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk Oblast, it's been the primary objective of Russian forces in the east. Earlier this month, basement military experts, both Western and Russian, had the fantods over what they called an irresistible Russian breakthrough in the Pokrovsk sector. But few of them bothered to report that this Russian breakthrough was directed away from the city, rather toward it. Russian progress was to the north instead of the south. Another example of Russian ineptitude and Ukrainian flexibility. In Pokrovsk, Ukraine was more than willing to cede irrelevant terrain, again allowing Russia to attack in the wrong direction, an operation that left overstretched Russian logistics to feed, water, and supply troops now occupying a useless stretch of dirt that contributed nothing to their military objectives. Despite intense assaults, including company-sized mechanized attacks and the infiltration of sabotage teams, Ukrainian defenders hold firm and continue to steadfastly hold the city of Pokrovsk. Russian gains here are limited to small villages, like Kotlene, which has changed hands 3 times. So far, the threat of Russian encirclement has been neutralized by Ukraine's robust defense and counterattacks. Pokrovsk remains in Ukrainian hands, a stinging rebuke to Russian ambitions. After capturing Bakhmut in 2023, Russian forces intensified effort to seize Chasiv Yar, a key citadel and high ground in Donetsk Oblast. Mechanized assaults in May and attritional infantry attacks through the summer have failed to secure the town. Since October 2024, Russian forces have held the eastern half of Chasiv Yar, but struggled to cross the Seversky Donetsk Canal, suffering heavy losses in urban combat. Ukrainian defensive have largely stalled Russian progress, with no operationally significant gains. In Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces aim to take Liman, but have been met with fierce Ukrainian resistance around the Zarabets River. Tursky and the Serebesk Forest are also key Ukrainian strongpoints. Limited redeployments from this sector to Kursk weakened Russian positions, and Ukrainian counterattacks have prevented any meaningful Russian advances. Again, Ukraine was willing to cede militarily irrelevant terrain, in this case, open fields to the west of the Zarabets River, allowing the Russians to spill blood and treasure to take ground in the wrong direction. The front has remained stable here, with Russian efforts yielding negligible results. Russian attempts to encircle the city of Kupiansk in Kharkiv Oblast have been particularly disastrous. Since November 2024, Russian forces captured approximately 500 square kilometers, but at a horrific cost. In a recent engagement, 2 entire Russian battalions were annihilated in a Ukrainian HIMARS strike, described by a Russian telegram channel as one of the bloodiest and most massive strikes in the entire war. The loss of these 2 maneuvering battalions underscores the futility of Russia's attritional tactics and their inability to effectively utilize battalion-sized units in either attack or defense. Russia's cross-border offensive into Sumy Oblast, launched in January 2025 to counter Ukraine's Kursk incursion, achieved limited success. Russian forces captured villages like Novenki and Basivka, but were bogged down in small-scale fighting. Ukrainian defenses held firm, and by March 2025, Russian gains were limited to only 43 square kilometers, far short of Putin's ambitious buffer zone plan. Ukraine's surprise incursion into Kursk Oblast in August 2024 forced Russia to divert significant forces, including elite VDV units, conscripts, and North Korean mercenaries in an attempt to reclaim lost territory. Washington's betrayal of Ukraine, with their unilateral withdrawal of field intelligence, allowed Russian forces to rally and counterattack. By March 2025, Russia had recaptured most of the 1,000 square kilometers initially seized by Ukraine. But Russia paid for that dirt dearly. In Kursk, Ukraine eliminated more than 19,000 Russian personnel, including 6,000 Korean mercenaries. Ukraine claimed 25,000 Russians wounded and over 1,000 armored vehicles destroyed. Ukrainian forces were able to break contact and maneuver to more defensible positions, leaving Russian units exhausted, overstretched, and unable to press home cross-border attacks. In 2025, Russia's summer offensive has exacted an egregious toll. According to Ukraine's general staff, Russian forces have suffered approximately 210,000 casualties, killed and wounded, across Luhansk, Donetsk, Kharkiv, and other regions. This figure aligns with estimates from The Economist, which suggest total Russian casualties since the war began range between 900,000 and 1.3 million Russian casualties. Material losses since May are equally staggering. Russia has lost over 1,200 tanks, 2,100 armored vehicles, 7,300 artillery systems, 157 multiple rocket launchers, and significant numbers of air defense systems and radars, both destroyed or damaged. It might be easier to understand the scope of Russian losses by grouping them into military units. Russian casualties at 210,000 are the equivalent of 525 battalions, or 14 full divisions of infantry in one summer. To put this in perspective, Russian losses since May are 6 times the full number of the infantry forces fielded by NATO's big 3 European armies, the UK, France, and Germany combined. 6 times the losses. Since May, Russia's lost 1,200 main battle tanks. That is the equivalent of 34 tank battalions, or 5 armored divisions. For the record, the United States has 1 armored division. Russia has lost 5. Just this summer. And what has the Russian summer offensive gained? Well, to listen to the armchair Russian experts, the end of Ukraine is near. The truth, not so much. This summer, Russia has gained just 1/3 of 1% of Ukraine's total landmass. Again, without a single strategic or even tactical accomplishment to show for the destruction of the functional equivalent of more than 26 divisions. No nation in history has ever achieved its war aims while sustaining such losses. Every day, Russia loses around 1,000 troops, the equivalent of about 2 battalions of infantry, day in, day out, 7 days a week. It's safe to say that no summer offensive in recent military history has ever failed so epically. Russia's reliance on platoon and company-sized attacks has proven futile against Ukraine's layered defenses. These small-scale assaults, often launched without adequate artillery or air support, have been easily repelled, resulting in high casualties and minimal Russian gains. Larger combined arms operations, such as those attempted around Vuhledar and Kupiansk, have also failed dramatically. In Vuhledar, Russian mechanized assaults in late July 2024 were annihilated, with Ukrainian forces inflicting heavy losses on armored vehicles and personnel. The destruction of 2 Russian battalions at Kupiansk, each obliterated within 30 minutes of combat, further highlights Russia's inability to execute maneuver warfare. Russian logistics have deteriorated to the point of absurdity. There are reports of troops using motorcycles, stolen civilian vehicles, and even donkeys to transport supplies. This reflects not only a collapse in logistical infrastructure, but also rampant corruption within the Russian military, where resources are diverted, misallocated, stolen, or even sold back to the troops to whom the equipment was issued. Russian morale is at an all-time low, with increasing reports of battlefield suicides. Though precise numbers are difficult to verify, Ukrainian sources suggest that hundreds of cases of troop suicide occurred in 2025 alone, driven by despair and brutal command practices. Russian military ineptitude, including poorly coordinated assaults and the redeployment of elite units to plug gaps, has further eroded Russia's combat effectiveness. In a desperate bid to break Ukrainian defenses, Russia has expanded its use of chemical weapons, including anti-riot agents, blister agents, and newly formulated asphyxiant gases. These violations of international law have failed to achieve strategic breakthroughs, as Ukrainian forces have adapted with protective measures and rapid countermeasures. What has the world said to this ever-expanding campaign of Russian chemical warfare? Well, not much. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, seems particularly uninterested, and the world's press has shrugged off an ever-increasing list of Ukrainian soldiers who have been killed by Russian chemical weapons. The use of these proscribed weapons underscores Russia's desperation and inability to achieve objectives through conventional means. Despite facing a larger adversary, Ukrainian forces have turned a posture of strategic defense into a decisive advantage. By leveraging internal lines of communication and supply, Ukraine has maintained operational flexibility, rapidly reinforcing threatened sectors and exploiting Russian overextensions. Ukrainian drone warfare remains dominant, with sophisticated electronic warfare and neutralizing Russian drones while enabling precise Ukrainian strikes on frontline logistics, command nodes, refineries, and ammunition depots. Deep strikes on Russian air bases and strategic industries have further strained Russia's war effort. Putin's summer offensive of 2025 has collapsed into a costly debacle. Russia's territorial gains since May are paltry in return for the loss of over 210,000 troops and thousands of pieces of armor and equipment. Putin's offensive has exposed systemic weaknesses, logistical breakdowns, corrupt command structures, plummeting morale, and rapidly diminishing combat effectiveness, while failing to achieve any major strategic objectives. Ukraine's defense, bolstered by superior drone warfare and deep strike capabilities, has ensured that Russia remains mired in a war it cannot win. As winter approaches, the Kremlin's illusions of victory are fading, and Ukraine stands stronger than ever, poised to endure and overcome. Hey, reporting from Ukraine, I'm Navy SEAL Chuck Pfarrer, and I'll see you again at the Kyiv Post's Point of Impact.